And another thing that we've seen, unfortunately, is a trend of freelance grant writers not tracking all of their billable hours. All right, so we are doing the State of the Grant Union of 2024 review. We have some different kind of highlights from around different things grant related. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. Number one, let's go ahead and look at federal funding, what happened in 2024. So in order to understand what happened in 2024, we got to look at 2023. We're looking at usaspending.gov. That is an open source place that you can get information from. A lot of our information around federal monies comes from there, because you can go ahead and click on what we went ahead and looked at was all the money given in 2023 in the federal government fiscal year, which is October 1st to the end of September. And we looked at for nonprofits and all types of grants. So that includes formula grants, cooperative grants, regular grants, all of that. And that is what we found to be very, very helpful. So in 2023, we actually saw that the US federal government for nonprofits, for grants, gave out 71,228 federal grants. And the full amount was about $46 billion in grant funding. Number one, we saw, and once again, this includes fixed costs, it includes formula. So that is the Department of Health and Human Services. What is it gonna be? Medicaid, Medicare, right? We're seeing most of that budget. Of that budget for Department of Health and Human Services was $23 billion in 2023, which is half of the budget, right? And that's basically the Medicaid, Medicare, all of that. The next one after that, Agency for International Development, that really helps with a lot of international disasters. Some monies were for Ukraine, that sort of thing for 2023 as well. And what we see then is we see the field of what we can see in 2023, so then we can compare it to 2024. When we look on usaspending.gov, we can see the first page of the highest 10, like the most money that's going to the top 10 agencies. What we see is 1 through 10, right? But in 2024, we saw, it wasn't even on the first page in 2023, we got bumped up to number 2. So of course, Department of Health and Human Service stayed the same, but we did see number 2 place was Environmental Protection Agency. And I'm gonna tell you why in a minute. But overall, 2023, as I mentioned, over 70,000 grants given out, 46 billion about in grant funding, and guess what? 2024, we actually saw a decrease in the number of grants, 63,201 federal grants given out to nonprofit organizations, but the total amount, about 70 billion. So we're nearly going up 40%, 140%, like we're nearly doubling that. So we saw a lot, and a part of this was the EPA did go up, and that is because we've seen an increase overall of green energy sector, especially with workforce development in that area and an expanse of technology in that area. Let's go ahead and break that down. Some of the federal grant highlights in 2024 included climate and clean energy, and that was especially within the tech sector, 16.5 billion. Overall, just tech, in addition to the climate and green energy, or clean energy, we also saw $25 billion allocated to tech industries, including AI, STEM, etc. We also saw 1.4 billion just for STEM growth specifically, 4.4 billion to national security, but to emphasize technology. So very interesting, we're seeing a huge growth in technology. We're also seeing some health growth as well, including cancer research and that sort of thing as well. So overall, we saw some main highlights, and I've used usaspending.gov as well as some other sources, Grantify, etc., to look at this information. We're also seeing some expenditures, like expending monies for COVID spending, right? For the increase that we saw in COVID, specifically for Department of Education. A lot of that ended right at the end of 2024, but they are able to expend it until 2025. However, there are also a lot of places were able to extend paying out to allocate more of those monies to be spent out in 2025. But we are overall seeing a lot of the COVID monies being expended. That's why we're really keeping an eye on what the trends are, especially as we go to the next year in 2025 with a new administration as well that will have different priorities. So we're definitely keeping an eye on this for you. All right, let's talk about number 2. So number 1, federal grant is what I want to talk about, all the updates in 2024. Number 2, OMB Super Circular updates. This is really important. The Office of Management and Budget, really important because what they do is control the policies around how they're giving out federal grant monies and just different management practices, etc. This is really important because as a grant writer, you're writing budgets. Even if you're not writing federal grants yet, you want to pay attention to these policies surrounding the federal budgets that you submit for your grants, because a lot of you, I say, go ahead and mimic what the feds are doing for your budgets when you're applying to foundations, because eventually you will be wanting to write federal grants and you don't want to give an accountant like a heart attack. Like, you want things set up, all your policies already positioned for that. You want to be ready and prepared to get federal grants, and this is an easy way to do that. There have been huge things going on. The last time the OMB Super Circular was updated was, I believe, 2016. So this does not happen every year. It is a big effort. There's a lot that went into it. And some of the big highlights, so I'm going to go over the main highlights. One of the biggest highlights was the increase in de minimis indirect cost rate. Now, it was big news back in 2016, the last time the OMB came out, because before that, you had to negotiate every single year an indirect cost rate. So most nonprofits never did that because it is a big, it's a lot to do, right? And they didn't want to do that. They don't have the capacity to do that, etc. So they only could have direct cost in their grants. And as you know, running a nonprofit or an organization, you have indirect costs for every single project you do. So that might be like if your bookkeeper isn't included in direct cost for an after-school program, right? The lights, the electricity, like if you have to do an audit, like including those prices overall. So what's great is that in 2016, they said, okay, you can go up to 10% without negotiating. So this was able to kind of level the playing field for especially smaller nonprofits to get more indirect cost from every single grant, up to 10%. Now, this has been raised again up to 15% now. So as October 2024, it is now up to 15% that you can put in your indirect cost rate for de minimis in your budgets. Really good. Procurement, also, there are some big changes in procurement as well, and asset management. So now, before you could dispose of, sell, or retain supplies and equipment under $5,000, so up to $5,000. So if you bought something up to $5,000 for a grant, right, use grant monies for it, you didn't have to give it back to the funding source potentially. You didn't have to do something specific with it. But that now has been raised up to $10,000, which is just easier for your nonprofit because costs are higher now and all of that, so it makes sense. There's also a big change in the audit threshold adjustment. This is really, really exciting because before it said if you have received at least $750,000 or more in federal funding in a fiscal year, you have to do an external audit, right? And while that might sound like a lot of money, honestly, nonprofits hit that pretty quickly, and doing an external audit is, one, expensive, two, it takes a lot of extra capacity for your bookkeeper to meet with the auditor, with you just to provide things, like it's a lot of work. So that has actually now been raised to $1 million in federal funds. So you do not have to have an external audit until you've reached at least $1 million in federal funding in a fiscal year. So that's good news. Another thing has been just the promotion of sustainability. So you can now buy used goods or refurbished, recycled goods, those sort of things instead of brand new things. So just like the emphasis on sustainability. Another change has been the inclusive procurement policies around vendors. So giving preference to you if you're having veteran-owned, minority-owned, women-owned vendors that you actually get your goods from as a nonprofit. That can definitely lead you into some preference areas and just like for your policies, really, really good. Another great thing has been the standardization efforts to make the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the NOFO. So that's where you get all of your grant instructions on grants.gov. They are standardizing that across the federal agencies. This is big news, especially, I mean, if you write for DOE, you got the columns that it comes in. DOJ is just one whole thing. Like, they're all so different on how the NOFOs look. So now they are making an effort to standardize these. Whether or not we're gonna like those, we'll see, but at least they're standardizing them. There's also just compliance and definition clarification. So they're using more plain language, using more definitions, making things more streamlined. So that can really help as well for all of you. And there's some things that are a little bit, they're doing more pre-award and risk assessment requirements. So really looking at your standardized templates, looking at your internal controls, your risk assessments, those sort of things. So this is a side note for you grant writers. This may be another thing you can consult on if you like to look at those things, if you provide financial policies and procurement kind of like manuals for nonprofits you work with and help on them adopting things. This could be really important for them to receive grants. All right, so now let's go ahead, number 3. Let's look at foundation and individual giving. Overall, we are seeing that charitable giving by foundations has grown by 1.7%, which is fantastic. And this is over $103 billion in 2023, which is really great. However, adjusted with inflation, we've actually seen a decline of 2.3% just because when we reconcile it with inflation. But overall, this is a good trend. Individual donors, right, we see an increase as well, 1.6% in 2023. So I am kind of looking at 2023 because this is the information we have because we're still in 2024, but this has trends going into 2024 as well. But overall, that is a decline of 2.4% when adjusted for inflation. But listen, y'all, $374 billion in individual donations. Like, that is amazing. So this also, if you look at $103 billion given by foundations and charitable giving, and then you compare that to $374 billion in individual donors, if the nonprofits you are working with do not have individual donor campaigns, that is something they should be doing ASAP because they need to have healthy finances, not just from grants, but from other sources as well. That is so good. And if that's something that you also want to think about consulting on, that would be great to add to your services if that's something you're interested in doing. We looked at religious organizations actually receiving the largest share of charitable dollars in 2023, followed closely by human services as well. And that might be because they're tapping more into foundation grants versus federal grants because there's a lot of restrictions on religious organizations within federal grants. I don't know, that's just kind of my view on it. But this could be a growth, this could be a trend. We're not really sure, but this is just the data that we have. Okay, we're definitely seeing more of this. I'm not seeing it super mainstream yet, but video applications, y'all. Video applications, going from grant writing to videos. Now, why a lot of this is mostly from foundations or like large individual donors like Mackenzie Scott. While they're looking at like videos, is they actually think it could level the playing field and make it easier to send over an application rather than writing something. They're thinking that takes a lot of capacity to write things. Video is easier, and they're saying, oh, you could just do it on your phone. We can make it really easy, all of that. So they are trying to level the playing field, and the intention is good. However, when I've talked to a lot of different grant writers, what they actually say is that actually makes their job a lot harder. Well, they're grant writers, right? And they say because, and we were just talking about this in the grant professional mentorship today, in our coaching call, with people were saying, oh my gosh, my clients have high anxiety when they have to do a video. And if you look at who actually gets awarded grants through video applications, they're usually pretty highly produced videos as well. So does it really level the playing field? I would argue it doesn't completely. I understand the intention there. I understand things need to be a little bit more streamlined, absolutely. But does it really do that? Not really. There's actually a lot more anxiety. Then you might have to write a script. Then they might have to increase their capacity then to go find other people to actually produce these things. Or their cause area just might not come across video very, very well. I had a client that did this. They had a tennis organization so they could like show where the tennis area was, and it came across really well. But some clients, they really want to protect their own clients, right? Some nonprofits want to protect their beneficiaries. They don't want to show all of this, and it might come across kind of cold. They might just not be charismatic on camera, etc. And it could actually do them a disservice. And especially like a lot of these videos, you got to do it in 90 seconds or 3 minutes, like to showcase your budget and your objectives and all of the things through video might not really come across. So there's still going to be a lot of internal racism, sexism, etc., especially with video, that could actually be neutralized with writing as well. So definitely that's something to think about. We are overall seeing the increase, of course, with applications online, and that is great. I'm all about applications online. So that's actually a very good trend. I'll kind of lump those under 4. So videos and online applications, we're definitely seeing that under number 4. So there's some skepticism with videos. Definitely online applications are easier. However, I will say as a disclaimer, the word counts are out of control. Sometimes those are way too short and they're not allowing you to really represent, or like in 200 words or 200 characters. It's the same kind of issue with the video in some ways. Number 5, some trends that we saw, which is really interesting to me, was we're seeing this more just throughout the years, but we're seeing a trend for nonprofits, the growth of nonprofits in the US South. Now, this is interesting because there's a lot of cities with a high cost of living and all of that. A lot of people have been moving to a lot of the cities in Texas and Florida, in the South, and we're seeing an increase in a population. So there's also an increase in nonprofits. Definitely this increase in giving to US-based nonprofits in the South because there's growing overall. Super interesting. Number 6, really interesting as well. Trends keep continuing since 2018, and especially with 2020 and beyond. We're seeing nonprofits actually not incorporating as often, but leaning more into incorporating under other fiscal sponsors. So I thought that was really interesting because they're just trying to not have to do the 1023, not have to do all the things, and just have an MOU instead with somebody who already has a 501c3 and apply for grants through them as a fiscal sponsor. So this is interesting. We are seeing that as a growing trend as people are trying to streamline processes and just streamline the nonprofit whole, business operations as well. Number 7, all right, this is huge, right? Tech and AI. It is the thing in 2024. So how we're seeing this, we're seeing foundations use AI too. It was really cool. I saw this report, really cool to say that a lot of foundations are actually, they had 81% of the surveyed, which they had surveyed a few hundred different foundations, were saying they're using AI, specifically with meeting notes and all of that. But here's the thing, with only 30% actually having AI policies. So what we're seeing is even you as a grant writer, you may be using AI right now. Do you have AI policies? I would definitely be looking into that the more that you're utilizing AI to also adopt some governance over it as well. So I think that's really important to see that there are those gaps just because it is so new, it's moving so quickly, people are adopting it really quickly, but the policies or the governance isn't quite there yet for many organizations or freelancers. We're also seeing more cybersecurity insurance, which is really interesting, but that makes sense, right? More things are online. You're wanting to protect your assets. Nonprofits are wanting to protect that. I know the mentorship student, Kim Collier, is going to be excited about that because she's all about cybersecurity and nonprofits. So definitely seeing an increase of cybersecurity insurance. And we're seeing an increase of grant writers just utilizing AI. Grantable, which is one of the biggest AI for grant writing software programs that are also a partner of ours. They have now, I think before they had 13,000 people using Grantable just a few months ago. Now they're up to 18,000 people. So it really is growing. And just if you even search AI and grant writing on YouTube, you'll see a lot of these videos have come out in the last year. There's a whole lot of them. And more grant writers are leaning into AI. So once again, if you're doing that, just make sure you know how to write a grant first from a human and that you have policies around that as well because it is here to stay. Number 8, overall, what is the state of grants with freelancers, specifically freelance grant writers? Well, overall, we are seeing the working from home norms here to stay, right? We're seeing this increase into the mainstream, especially freelancers more into the mainstream. And we are seeing some hybrid solutions as well for staff. And a lot of nonprofits have leaned into that because it's a benefit that they don't have to give more money for to pay people more, but they can give more flexibility, like working from home some days of the week, working in the office some days of the week, and having more of a hybrid situation. But also, this is good for you all as freelancers to know because it has become more of a mainstream where even if you're not working in the office, they still know that you're getting things done. So that's good. Another thing that was mentioned from their mentorship today, which is really cool, and I love this, we're seeing more job salaries posted for grant writers. This is really good. So job applications like on LinkedIn or online, you're actually seeing more and more the salary posted there, which leads to equity instead of saying, oh, just like it's negotiable. And then you're like, I have no idea, right? Like all the things. And for her, she was saying that's super helpful, especially for us freelancers, because we can kind of see where the market is for staff. As well, which helps us with our pricing. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's interesting. But I just really like that it's more equitable now. So you know what the salary is if you even want to apply for that job or not. Especially as a grant writer for a staff position, you don't have to go in thinking, I don't even know what I would, ask for. So another thing anecdotally that I've seen with hundreds of freelance grant writers is LinkedIn is a social media place to book out sales calls. So if you want to book out sales calls, having a web presence is great, but being on LinkedIn, if you are going to be on any social media, that's where you need to be. People will find you there because it's normally the social media platform for hiring, for job applications, all of that. And another thing that we've seen, unfortunately, is a trend of freelance grant writers not tracking all of their billable hours. We saw this with the Global Development Solutions pricing, freelance grant writer pricing strategies report in 2023. We have a YouTube video on that, a podcast on that. Do check out Rachel Waterman with that pricing strategy report. But we do see that freelance grant writers are still not tracking or bill all of their billable hours, and they're not charging for their billable hours. So we definitely want to see that reversed. So let's go ahead and wrap up our 2024 State of the Grant Union report. And we're looking at federal funding. It definitely has increased in 2024. Not the number of applications, it's actually decreased, but the overall giving to $70 billion. We're seeing a lot of that going to tech, going to climate organizations, green jobs, that sort of thing, and tech-related jobs. We're also seeing some of that in health as well, and just the overall tech sector. We're also seeing the OMB had the updates this year, the Super Circular, really excited about that, and to see all of those changes going on there that are very important for grant writers to know. Foundation and individual giving is up, even though adjusted with inflation, it is down, but overall the trends are increasing. That is a good thing. We are seeing shifting to more nonprofits in the US South, which is the growth of population is one of the main results there as well. More fiscal sponsorship rather than getting 501c3s, although we're always going to see a growth of nonprofits, but sometimes you're not going to see those on the surface level. They might be hidden underneath because they're being sub-grantees now to US 501c3s that are already incorporated as well. AI is definitely changing the landscape for funding. Absolutely. From grant writers to foundations, we're definitely seeing a change there. And freelance is becoming more mainstream. This is good news for you freelance grant writers. All right, that is my report. Thank you. I'm Holly Rustick with Grant Writing and Funding. Make sure you subscribe so you get all of our notifications, and I hope you enjoyed our 2024 year-end report, our look at the State of the Grant Union.